Death did not announce itself to Eleanor Vance with drama or pain. It arrived quietly, disguised as a conversation meant for someone else. She lay motionless in the hospital bed, her breathing shallow, her face slack beneath the soft lights of the private wing that bore her name in discreet silver lettering. Vance Medical's VIP suite had been designed down to the smallest detail to soothe the wealthy and powerful. Imported stone floors, sound-dampening walls, curated art chosen to suggest serenity without sentimentality. Eleanor herself had approved every detail years ago, believing, with typical efficiency, that if people were going to suffer, they might as well do so in comfort. She had never imagined she would be the one lying here, pretending not to listen. Outside her room, voices drifted through the narrow gap beneath the door. Dr. Simon Hayes spoke first, measured, professional, stripped of any unnecessary warmth. The liver failure is progressing rapidly. We've reached the limits of intervention. Eleanor did not open her eyes. She counted her breaths instead. In, out, steady. This was something she had learned early in life. When the truth was near, stillness made it louder. How long? Matthew asked. Her husband's voice was low, restrained. To an untrained ear it might have sounded like concern. But Eleanor had built entire careers on understanding tone, and something in his voice did not ring true. There was tension there, yes, but not the tremble of grief. It was sharper, more contained. Anticipation masquerading as fear. Hayes hesitated. 3 days. Possibly less. 3 days. The word echoed through Eleanor's mind, not as panic, but as arithmetic. Time had always been a resource to her. Negotiated, leveraged, bought. Now was being rationed. Silence followed. Eleanor imagined Matthew standing there, absorbing the information, performing the role of devoted husband in his tailored suit, his hand likely resting on the doorframe exactly as it always did when he wanted to appear grounded. Thank you, Matthew finally said. We'll take it from here. Footsteps retreated. The handle turned. Eleanor felt the shift in the air as the door opened. Then the subtle dip of the mattress as Matthew sat beside her. She caught the familiar scent of his cologne, expensive, understated, chosen carefully to communicate success without vulgarity. The same scent she had once found reassuring in the evenings when her house felt too large and too quiet. His fingers closed around her hand. Warm, controlled. She remained perfectly still. I wish you could hear me, he murmured. Eleanor's mind sharpened. People said dangerous truths when they believed themselves unobserved. I tried, Matthew continued softly. I really did. He sighed, the sound carefully crafted to resemble sorrow. But you were difficult, always in control, always watching. His thumb brushed the inside of her wrist where her pulse fluttered, an intimate, claiming gesture. For 3 years, I played my part, he went on, the softness in his voice thinning into something harder. I smiled when needed, listened when required, waited. And now, he whispered, closer, everything you built belongs to me. Something cold unfolded inside Eleanor. Not fear, not despair, but recognition. He squeezed her hand once, gently, then released it. I'll be back soon, he said, louder now, grief carefully reassembled. Please notify me if anything changes. The door closed behind him. The room settled into silence, broken only by the steady ticking of a wall clock she had approved years earlier because it was quiet and precise. Eleanor opened her eyes. The ceiling swam briefly before locking into focus. Her body felt heavy, its rebellion complete, but her mind was startlingly clear. In that clarity, the past months rearranged themselves into a single, merciless line. The illness had begun subtly, a vague nausea that came and went, fatigue that bordered on exhaustion, dizziness she had dismissed as dehydration or overwork. Her doctors had blamed stress. What else was new? Most people who built empires were told stress would kill them eventually. Eleanor had accepted that risk long ago, but the decline had accelerated. Weakness she could no longer outrun. Confusion creeping into meetings. 3 weeks ago, She had collapsed mid-sentence in her own office, the room spinning violently as the world dropped away. That was when doubt crept in. Eleanor did not reach the top by trusting appearances. Quietly, without involving her attending physicians, she had ordered independent blood work. 2 labs, 2 states, paid in cash. The results had arrived 5 days ago, when she was already confined to this bed. A rare drug, restricted, used exclusively in palliative care. In small doses, it caused drowsiness. In repeated doses, it destroyed the liver with methodical certainty. The first report she had dismissed as error. The second had eliminated denial. Now, Matthew's words completed the picture. She had not been sick. She had been poisoned. Eleanor tried to move, tried to lift herself, to sit upright, but her muscles failed, trembling uselessly. For the first time since the results arrived, panic threatened the edges of her control. 3 days. If she died without acting, everything, every clinic, every property, every account she had built long before Matthew entered her life, would legally become his. He had known exactly what he was doing. The sound of a bucket echoed faintly from the hallway. Water sloshed. A mop squeaked rhythmically against tile. "Miss," Eleanor called, forcing power into her voice. The noise stopped. A moment later, the door opened just enough for a young woman to peer inside. "Yes? Are you okay?" the woman asked, her tone cautious. "I could get a nurse." "No," Eleanor said. "Close the door." The woman hesitated, then complied. "What's your name?" The woman's dark eyes flickered with uncertainty. "Isabella. Isabella Garcia." Eleanor studied her. Plain clothes, worn sneakers, hands rough from disinfectant and labor. Someone invisible enough to be overlooked, a liability to no one. "Isabella," Eleanor said slowly, "what I am about to ask you must remain between us." The young woman swallowed. I don't understand." "I'm conscious," Eleanor said, "and I'm running out of time." She indicated the nightstand with her eyes. "There's a phone there. Call the attorney listed as William Davis. Tell him Eleanor Vance needs him immediately. Personal matter. Urgent." "I can't," Isabella said instinctively. "That's not allowed." "If you don't," Eleanor replied calmly, "the man who just left this room will inherit everything I built, and he murdered me for it." The word murdered hit the air like a dropped glass. Isabella stared at her, disbelief battling fear. "I'm serious," Eleanor said, "and if you help me, you will never have to do this job again." Silence stretched. Outside, footsteps passed the door. Then Isabella moved. She retrieved the phone with trembling hands and pressed the contact. When the call connected and William Davis agreed to come, Eleanor closed her eyes, not in weakness, but in resolve. 1 hour, she said quietly as Isabella returned the phone. In 1 hour, everything changes. The light outside the window dimmed into early evening. Inside the room, the quiet verdict of death was no longer the only decision being made. Time, Eleanor discovered, behaved differently when measured in heartbeats instead of years. The hours stretched, not long enough to waste, not short enough to endure easily. It pressed against her ribs with each breath, insisting on awareness. The sedatives blurred the edges of her body, but left her thoughts cruelly sharp. She felt every second drip through her, grain by grain, like sand slipping through a cracked hourglass. Isabella remained seated near the wall, hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. She did not look at Eleanor. She stared instead at the door, as if afraid that looking away might invite it to open. "You can breathe," Eleanor said after a while. "No one is bursting in just yet." Isabella startled, embarrassed. "Sorry, I keep expecting someone to." "They won't," Eleanor cut in. "Matthew believes I'm unconscious. The staff believes I'm fading. No one looks closely at something they think is already decided." That was one lesson Eleanor had learned early. Inevitability bred negligence. Minutes crawled past. Somewhere down the corridor, a phone rang and was silenced. A cart rattled. Voices rose and fell. The clinic continued to function with clockwork indifference to the fact that its founder was dismantling her own life from a hospital bed. Eleanor shifted her gaze to the window. Outside, the sky was bruising into evening, Chicago's skyline dissolving into steel blue silhouettes. She had always loved the city at dusk, brutal, honest, unromantic. It had taught her how to build without sentiment and survive without softness. 3 marriages in her world usually ended in ruin. She had only made 2 attempts. The first had collapsed when she was 29, before the money, before the power. The second, Matthew, had come later, when success hollowed out the house and left echoes behind. She closed her eyes briefly, not to rest, but to remember. Matthew had been charming in the beginning. Carefully so. He had never tried to dazzle her, only to understand her. He listened when she spoke about work, asked questions, took notes as if she were mentoring him, which in some ways she had been. When he invited her to dinner, tentative and respectful, she had surprised herself by feeling nervous. Lonely people were vulnerable not to predators, she now realized, but to patience. Eleanor opened her eyes again as the door opened softly. William Davis stepped inside. He was in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed, the kind of man whose suits looked expensive not because they were flashy, but because they fit perfectly. Years of legal precision had etched lines beside his eyes, not from age, but from focus. Eleanor had trusted him with every asset she owned. He took one look at her and went very still. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "you didn't tell me it was this advanced." "That would have wasted time," she replied. "Close the door. Sit." He obeyed instantly, motioning for the woman behind him, his assistant, Jessica, to close the door as well. She did, glancing curiously at Isabella, who shrank even further into herself. Davis exhaled slowly and pulled a slim recorder from his jacket. "May I?" "Yes." He pressed record, sat on the table near the bed, and leaned in. "Now," Eleanor said, "listen carefully. What I'm about to tell you sounds theatrical. It is not." She told him everything. The unexplained illness, the independent blood tests, the rare palliative drug. Matthew's words in the hospital room, spoken with confidence because he believed she could not hear him. Davis listened without interrupting. His jaw tightened incrementally, the way it did when contracts soured and liable parties revealed themselves. "This is attempted." "No," he corrected himself, eyes sharpening. "This is completed homicide if the toxicology is confirmed post-mortem." "It will be," Eleanor said. "I made sure of the documentation." "And your husband?" Davis asked softly. "He did it for the inheritance," Eleanor replied. "All assets were premarital. If I die without a will, everything passes to him." Davis leaned back, hands steepled. "Then we have one priority: securing your final wishes beyond challenge." "I want a new will drafted immediately," Eleanor said. "Effective today. I leave everything to her." She nodded faintly toward Isabella. The room held its breath. Davis turned to look at Isabella, as if seeing her for the first time, not dismissively, but assessing her the way he assessed witnesses and fiduciaries. "You understand what this means?" he asked her. Isabella swallowed. "Not really." "It means," Davis said evenly, "that you will inherit Eleanor Vance's entire estate. Clinics, real estate, accounts, tens of millions. It also means her husband will become your enemy." Isabella's eyes darted to Eleanor. "Why her?" Davis asked quietly. "There will be challenges, lawsuits, threats." "Because she's outside Matthew's sphere," Eleanor said. "Because I don't have time to interrogate character anymore. And because he will never believe I was capable of this." She looked at Isabella directly. "I don't expect you to understand this yet, but I need one promise. When I'm gone, you pursue the truth. You see his prosecution through. You do not let him walk away." Isabella's lips trembled. "I promise." A knock sounded at the door. Jessica opened it to reveal an elderly man with a briefcase and a calm, authoritative demeanor, the notary. Behind him stood a woman in her 50s, hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes alert and unyielding. "Dr. Klein," Davis said in relief. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." They entered, introductions swiftly made. Dr. Klein moved to Eleanor's bedside immediately, her manner brisk but respectful. Ms. Vance, she said, I need to assess your mental capacity. Please answer clearly. She asked simple questions at first. The date, the location, the president. Eleanor answered without hesitation. Then came harder ones, patterns, memory, logic. Eleanor responded calmly, her mind a blade honed by decades of negotiation and crisis management. Dr. Klein nodded and signed the form. Patient is fully oriented, legally competent. The notary unfolded his laptop and began drafting quickly, his fingers moving with practiced speed. He read the document aloud when finished, his voice formal, precise. I, Eleanor Vance, being of sound mind and acting of my own free will, do hereby bequeath all property and assets belonging to me at the time of my death to Isabella Garcia. Each sentence felt like a transfer of gravity. Do you understand, the notary asked, that this disinherits your lawful spouse? I do. Are you acting without coercion? Yes. Do you affirm this is your final will? I affirm it. The paper was printed, placed carefully on Eleanor's lap. Her hand shook as she took the pen. Not from doubt, from exhaustion. She signed. The notary sealed the document. Witnesses signed. Davis recorded everything from 3 separate angles. When it was done, the room exhaled. The notary closed his briefcase. This document will be filed immediately for safekeeping. Eleanor let her head rest back against the pillow. The effort had drained what little she had left, but satisfaction steadied her breathing. Davis leaned close. I will initiate a criminal investigation. I'll secure the toxicology reports and notify the district attorney. Your husband will not escape this. Good, Eleanor whispered. The room slowly emptied. One by one, they left Davis, Jessica, the notary, Dr. Klein. Isabella lingered. You should go home, Eleanor said faintly. Tomorrow will not be kind to you. I'll come back, Isabella promised. Eleanor closed her eyes. She did not wake again. Matthew Asher learned of his wife's death at 6:17 a.m., standing in the corridor outside the VIP wing with a paper cup of coffee cooling between his hands. A nurse he recognized, young, earnest, unfortunate, approached him with practiced solemnity. Her eyes were red in a way meant to communicate shared grief. She spoke gently, as if volume itself could be a cruelty. I'm so sorry, Mr. Asher, she said. She passed during the night. It was peaceful. Matthew let the cup slip from his fingers. Coffee splashed across the polished tile. He staggered back a half step, one hand clutching at his chest, breath hitching in sharp, theatrical pulls. Oh God, he said hoarsely. Eleanor. Staff converged at once. Someone guided him to a chair. Someone else pressed tissues into his hands. He buried his face in them and wept, loudly, convincingly. He thanked the nurses between sobs. He shook hands he would not remember. When words were required, he found them easily. When silence was more effective, he used that instead. Only once, when no one was looking directly at him, did something else flicker behind his eyes. Relief. By 8 o'clock, he was back in Eleanor's house, the one she had owned long before he arrived with his careful compliments and gradual encroachments. The housekeeper hovered, red-eyed and trembling. Offering condolences, he accepted graciously. Please, he told her softly, take the day off. I'll manage. He went into Eleanor's office, the room she had guarded with the most ferocity, and closed the door. The city outside the window glittered in the early light, indifferent and enormous. He poured himself a generous measure of her brandy, sat in her leather chair, and let out a slow, satisfied breath. 3 years, he thought. 3 years of tolerance and calculation. Worth every moment. His phone rang. Jennifer, he answered, smiling before he could stop himself. It's done. A pause. Then her voice, cautious. You sound relieved. I am, he replied, swirling the brandy. She died peacefully. Liver failure. No one's asking questions. And the will. There is no will, Matthew said confidently. I checked years ago. Everything passes to me by default. Premarital assets or not. The law favors the spouse. Jennifer exhaled. Then we're free. Yes, he said. Give me 6 months. We sell the clinics, liquidate the real estate, and disappear somewhere warm. He hung up and raised the glass in a mock toast to the empty room. The timing, the knock came 20 minutes later. William Davis did not wait to be invited in. He entered Eleanor's office with the quiet authority of a man who had come to deliver a fact that would not bend. His suit was dark, his expression controlled, his eyes cold. "Matthew," he said, "my condolences." "Thank you," Matthew replied smoothly. "A tragic loss." "Yes," Davis said. "It was." He sat down without asking permission and placed a folder on the desk. "I need to inform you of a matter concerning Eleanor's estate." Matthew's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around the stem of his glass. "Of course. Eleanor executed a will yesterday afternoon," Davis said. "It was properly notarized, witnessed, and recorded." The room tilted slightly. Matthew set the glass down with deliberate care. "That's impossible. She was heavily sedated. Incompetent." "On the contrary," Davis replied. "She was assessed by an independent psychiatrist immediately prior to signing. She was found fully lucid and legally competent." Matthew leaned back, searching for the right expression. Skepticism, confusion, controlled outrage. "Then who is the beneficiary?" Davis met his gaze evenly. "You are not." Silence stretched. Matthew laughed once, sharp and incredulous. "That's ridiculous." "She had no reason. All of Eleanor Vance's property," Davis continued, "has been bequeathed to Isabella Garcia." The name landed with no weight at first, like a word from a foreign language. "Who?" Matthew asked. "A hospital assistant," Davis said, "present at the execution of the will." Matthew stood so abruptly his chair screeched backward. "That's absurd. She didn't even know this woman." "She knew enough," Davis replied. "This won't stand," Matthew snapped. "I'll contest it. I'll have it thrown out." "You may attempt to," Davis said coolly, "but I advise you to prepare for disappointment. The will is airtight." He rose. "The formal reading is tomorrow morning. Your presence is expected." When Davis left, the room felt smaller, compressed by something heavy and unseen. Matthew stared at the closed door. Then, slowly, his face hardened. Somewhere across the city, Isabella Garcia stood in line at a bus stop, her coat pulled tight against the cold. She clutched a paper cup of tea she did not remember buying, hands shaking faintly as if the ground itself had become unreliable. William Davis had called her an hour earlier. "It's official," he said. Eleanor passed during the night. The news hit with unexpected force. Isabella had known it was coming, but inevitability did not soften impact. Eleanor's voice, cool, commanding, unwavering, felt suddenly impossible, like something imagined rather than real. "What happens now?" Isabella asked quietly. "Now," Davis replied, "you become the center of a storm. The reading of the will is tomorrow. After that, Matthew Asher will move quickly." "Move how?" "To reclaim what he believes is his." At the notary's office the next morning, Matthew arrived early with Jennifer at his side, her arm threaded through his in a show of solidarity. Cameras flashed outside. The press always sensed rupture in money. The notary cleared his throat and read aloud the will. When the name Isabella Garcia echoed through the room, Matthew felt something inside him fracture cleanly and completely. "This is fraud," he said flatly. "Manipulation." "You're mistaken," Davis replied. "It's intention." Jennifer squeezed his arm. "We can fix this," she whispered. "People like her make deals." Matthew watched Isabella across the room, small, pale, standing behind Davis like a shadow, given form. She did not look triumphant. She looked terrified. Good, he thought. Fear could be shaped. As the meeting concluded, Isabella left through a side entrance under Davis's guidance. Matthew stood motionless, jaw clenched, eyes burning. "She thinks she's won," he said quietly. Jennifer followed his gaze. "Then don't let her." That night, in a rented room miles away, Isabella lay awake staring at the ceiling. Eleanor's final words echoed in her mind. "See it through." Outside, a car idled too long at the curb. Isabella's phone buzzed with a single message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." Her pulse spiked. Some wars, she was learning, did not end with a signature. They had only just begun. Matthew Asher did not sleep that night. He lay awake in Eleanor's bed, his bed now. He corrected himself automatically, staring at the ceiling she had chosen because it reflected light softly, without glare. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, the one she wore rarely and sparingly, as if scent were a resource to be conserved. The house was quiet in the particular way wealth created. No neighbors close enough to hear, no sounds except the distant hum of the city and the soft, ticking machinery that kept everything running. His mind churned, looping through the same sequence of images with obsessive precision. Isabella Garcia. The name tasted wrong in his mouth. Too small, too ordinary. A person like that did not inherit empires. People like that cleaned up after people like him. They disappeared at the end of shifts, forgot themselves in rented rooms, counted hours instead of assets. Eleanor had humiliated him. Even in death, she had found a way to reach back and strip him bare. He rolled onto his side, jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Anger, hot and acidic, burned through him, not wild but focused. He had not spent 3 years planning, dosing, waiting, just to be undone by a woman who pushed him off. No, this was not over. Not even close. By morning, he had a plan. Matthew moved quickly, efficiently, the way he always did when crisis sharpened him. He showered, dressed, ate nothing. He ordered coffee from the kitchen and let it go untouched. The housekeeper avoided his eyes as she moved through the rooms. Grief had not erased her instincts. By mid-morning, he was on the phone. "Find her," he said to the man on the other end. A private security contractor he had met through Jennifer, someone who did not ask unnecessary questions. Everything. Where she lives. Who she talks to. Who's protecting her. A pause. "Yes," Matthew continued coolly. "I'm willing to pay." He ended the call and stared out the window at the city Eleanor had loved and controlled. For the first time since the reading of the will, something like calm settled over him. Fear was leverage. Silence was costly. And Isabella Garcia, for all her sudden importance, was still fundamentally predictable. She would be overwhelmed, grateful, terrified. People like that always were. Isabella, meanwhile, had never felt so conspicuous in her life. She sat rigidly in the back seat of William Davis's car as it pulled away from the notary's office, her hands clenched in her lap. The city blurred past. The steel, the traffic, the anonymous faces, but she felt exposed, as though something irrevocable had been stamped across her forehead. Air. It was absurd. She had slept in a rented room 2 nights ago, eaten instant noodles standing up because there was no table. Now her name was on documents people would kill for. "You did well," Davis said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. She almost laughed at that. "I didn't do anything." "You stood your ground," he replied. "That's enough for now." She hesitated. He was looking at me. "Matthew." Like I'd stolen something. "He believes you did," Davis said calmly. "Which means he would try to take it back." Isabella's fingers tightened. "What do I do?" "For the moment, disappear," Davis said. "I've arranged temporary accommodations in another state. Quiet, unregistered. You'll travel under a different last name." Her stomach flipped. "That sounds extreme." "So is systematic poisoning," Davis said evenly. That shut her up. He dropped her at a nondescript building that could have been an insurance office or a closed clinic. Inside, a woman she didn't know handed her keys, a folder, and a debit card. "You're safe here," the woman said. For now. For now." That night, Isabella sat on the narrow bed of the furnished room, staring at the blank wall. Eleanor's face rose unbidden in her mind. Sharp eyes, unyielding calm. See it through. Isabella hugged her knees to her chest. She had promised, but no one had told her how terrifying a promise could become. 2 days later, Matthew Asher received his first report. "She's gone," the contractor said. "Quit the clinic without notice. Packed light. No forwarding address." But she didn't plan it well. Matthew leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Go on." "We tracked her through a debit transaction. Out of state. Temporary housing. Lawyer-backed." Matthew smiled thinly. "Of course." "She's scared," the man continued. "We can approach her quietly. Make an offer." Matthew's smile widened. "Do that. Start gently." The call came that evening. Isabella had just finished reheating soup when her burner phone vibrated. Unknown number. Her heart leapt in her throat. She let ring once, twice, then answered. Miss Garcia, a man's voice said smoothly. My name is Richard. I represent someone interested in resolving an unfortunate misunderstanding. Isabella's throat went dry. I don't know what you're talking about. You do, Richard said. Mr. Asher would like to speak with you, but we don't want to alarm you. This doesn't have to become adversarial. She swallowed. Tell him to talk to my lawyer. That can be arranged, Richard replied. But first a thought. You didn't ask for this inheritance, did you? Isabella said nothing. There's a document, the man continued easily. A renunciation. You sign it. The estate reverts to its rightful place. In exchange, you receive a generous settlement. Enough to change your life without ruining it. Her hands were shaking now. I'm not interested. A pause. Subtle, deliberate. Think carefully before refusing, Richard said. Mr. Asher is not a patient man. The line went dead. Isabella sat on the edge of the bed, phone still pressed to her ear. Her chest felt too tight to draw a full breath. She set the phone down slowly, as if it might explode. They had found her. Matthew listened as the contractor relayed the call. She refused, the man said. But she's scared. Good, Matthew replied. Fear loosens people. And if it doesn't, Matthew's eyes hardened. Then we apply pressure. The pressure came quickly. A bouquet of flowers appeared outside Isabella's door the next morning. No card, just lilies, white, funereal. Later that afternoon, someone slipped an envelope under her door. Inside was a printed photograph, her old rented room, taken from across the street. On the back, a single line written in careful block letters. We know where you've been. Isabella called Davis in tears. They're trying to scare you, he said sharply. And it's working exactly as intended. I didn't think it would be like this, she whispered. I thought the will made it over. The will secured Eleanor's assets, Davis corrected. It didn't neutralize Matthew Asher. There was a pause. I'm escalating this, he went on. I've already filed papers with the district attorney. The poisoning investigation is moving faster than he realizes. And until then, she asked. Until then, you must not be alone, Davis said. And you must not engage, not even once. But isolation had a way of magnifying fear. That night, Isabella lay awake, listening to every sound. Footsteps in the hallway, a car passing outside. Her mind replayed Matthew's gaze at the notary's office again and again. Not rage, not grief, but certainty. The certainty of someone who believed the world owed him restitution. Her phone buzzed again at 2:14 a.m. This time it was a text. Last offer, retire rich and alive. Or keep fighting and see what happens. Isabella sat up, pulse hammering. Somewhere, Matthew Asher was watching the clock, calculating her breaking point. And for the first time since Eleanor's death, Isabella wondered, not whether she could see this through, but what it might cost her if she did. Fear, Isabella discovered, was not loud. It did not scream or panic or demand attention. It sat quietly in the body, tightening muscles, shortening breath, bending perception until every ordinary sound felt intentional. The hum of a refrigerator became suspicious. The scrape of tires outside sounded deliberate. Even silence felt like something waiting. She did not sleep. By morning, exhaustion pressed against her eyes like sand. She showered and dressed mechanically, choosing clothes that made her feel smaller. Nothing bright, nothing memorable. Davis's instructions echoed in her head. Do not engage. Do not respond. Do not go out alone. She followed them as best she could. At 10 a.m., Davis arrived with someone new. This is Michael Johnson, he said. Former police. Private investigator. He's with us. Johnson was in his early 40s, broad-shouldered, graying at the temples, his movements economical. He looked around the room before sitting down, eyes cataloging exits, windows, reflections. You're being tested, he said without preamble. Flowers, photos, threatening texts. Classic escalation. Isabella's voice shook despite herself. How far does that usually go? Depends, Johnson replied, on how desperate he is. Davis folded his hands. The good news is Matthew Asher is already making mistakes. Isabella looked up. What kind? Johnson pulled a tablet from his bag and slid it across to her. On the screen was grainy surveillance footage, a pharmacy counter, a man in a baseball cap, his face turned just enough for recognition. That's him, Isabella whispered. Yes, Johnson said. 2 months before Eleanor collapsed. He paid cash for a controlled palliative drug. No prescription. The pharmacist has been identified and questioned. Isabella's stomach twisted. So you can prove it. We can prove pattern and access, Davis said. And Eleanor helped us more than he ever imagined. She documented her symptoms obsessively, dates, severity, correlations. Combined with the tox reports, it's compelling. And Matthew? Isabella asked. He doesn't know how close we are, Johnson said, which is why he's focused on you instead of running. Davis leaned forward. This is important, Isabella. His attempts to intimidate you help us. Threats, coercion, any attempt to force you to renounce the inheritance strengthens both the civil and criminal cases. She frowned. So I'm bait. You're protected bait, Davis corrected. But yes, Isabella swallowed. The words sat badly with her. She had never positioned herself at the center of anything more complex than a late rent payment. I don't know if I can do this, she said quietly. Johnson met her eyes. You already are. Matthew Asher sensed the shift before he understood it. For the first time since Eleanor's death, his calls went unanswered. The contractor he'd hired stopped returning messages. One of his bank transfers was flagged. Minor issues one by one, but together unsettling. He sat at the kitchen table in the house that no longer belonged to him, staring at a legal notice he hadn't yet opened. Jennifer paced behind him, smoking despite the house rules. You said this would work, she snapped. You said she'd fold. She will, Matthew said, though the certainty in his voice had dulled. She's scared. That's not enough, Jennifer said. Fear only works if you can finish the job. Matthew shot her a look. Watch your mouth. Jennifer stopped pacing. I'm being practical. If the DA opens a case, intimidation becomes evidence. And if they prove poisoning, they won't. Matthew cut in. The drug breaks down. I was careful. Careful, Jennifer repeated flatly. You bought it illegally. You dosed her in her own clinic. And you talked too much. Matthew's jaw tightened. She was supposed to die quietly. And instead, Jennifer said, you've got lawyers, investigators, and a nobody with everything you wanted. Silence fell between them. Then Jennifer exhaled sharply. I'm not going down for you. The words landed harder than any accusation. What are you saying? Matthew demanded. I'm saying, she replied, that if this turns into an arrest, I'll cooperate. Matthew laughed bitterly. You wouldn't. I absolutely would, she said. You used me, and now you're a liability. She crushed out her cigarette and grabbed her coat. Matthew watched her leave without stopping her. When the door slammed, something finally cracked. For the first time, the future he had constructed collapsed into fragments that no longer aligned. 2 days later, Detective Luis Rodriguez opened the file. He had a reputation in the Chicago PD for being methodical and incorruptible, traits that made him unpopular in certain circles. He did not rush cases, and he did not drop them. He read Eleanor Vance's journal first. Dates, symptoms, comments in the margins. Tea tasted bitter. Unusual drowsiness. Matthew insists it's herbal. Rodriguez's mouth tightened. He read the lab reports next, then the surveillance stills, then the timeline. Motive, means, opportunity. The triad was complete. He set the file aside and picked up the phone. Prepare an order, he told his assistant. We're exhuming. Isabella received the call that afternoon. Don't panic, Davis said immediately. This is progress. She was sitting on the edge of the bed again, phone clenched in her hand. You're opening the body? Yes, Davis said. And as unpleasant as that sounds, it's necessary. Forensics will confirm prolonged poisoning beyond question. A pause. He'll know. He already suspects, Davis replied. Which means the window is closing. Closing for what? For him to act irrationally. The line went quiet for a beat. Isabella, Davis said carefully, I need you to prepare for the possibility that he will try to confront you directly. Her pulse spiked. I thought. We hoped he'd limit himself to intermediaries, Davis said. But he's unraveling. Desperate people don't respect strategy. She closed her eyes. Eleanor's voice surfaced unbidden, calm and steady. You don't win by reacting. You win by anticipating. What do I do? Isabella asked. You trust us, Davis said, and you do exactly as instructed. Matthew received the notice of exhumation the next morning. He read it twice, his vision blurring on the third line. This was real now. Not threats, not negotiation, investigation. His phone buzzed immediately. Unknown number. He answered without thinking. Matthew Asher, a man's voice asked. This is Detective Rodriguez with the Chicago Police Department. Matthew's mouth went dry. Yes. I'd like you to come in for questioning regarding your wife's death, Rodriguez said. Voluntarily, for now. Voluntarily. Matthew swallowed. When? Tomorrow morning. 9 a.m. The line went dead. He stared at the phone, mind racing. If the exhumation proved poisoning. No, he couldn't allow that. He dialed the contractor again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. Matthew slammed the phone down, breath coming fast. He had one move left. Isabella was leaving the building under Johnson's escort when her phone vibrated. Unknown number again. Johnson's hand tightened on her elbow. Don't answer. She hesitated. Then, against every instinct screaming caution, she held up the phone. I should hear this, she said. Johnson studied her face, then nodded once. She put the phone on speaker. Isabella, Matthew's voice said softly. Unfiltered. Close. Her stomach dropped. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he continued. I didn't want it to come to this. Johnson's eyes narrowed. You don't get to contact her directly, Johnson said, stepping closer to the speaker. Matthew ignored him. You think the justice system cares about you? You're disposable. Isabella's voice shook, but held. So was Eleanor. There was a pause, then a low, bitter laugh. You have no idea who you're dealing with, Matthew said. This ends one way or another. Johnson ended the call. We have enough, he said grimly. That night, Isabella did not sleep at all. Outside, sirens moved through the city like warnings. Somewhere else, Matthew Asher packed a bag, cash, documents, and a burner phone. When the sun rose, one of them would be free. The other would not. By sunrise, Matthew Asher had already decided that obedience was no longer an option. He packed quickly, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had rehearsed this moment in the abstract, but never believed himself capable of reaching it. Cash first. What little he still had untraced. Documents next. Passport, spare IDs, insurance papers he didn't bother to read. A burner phone, purchased months ago and never activated, slid into his coat pocket. He paused only once, standing in the doorway of Eleanor's bedroom. The bed was empty now, perfectly made. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and flowers. It looked stripped of meaning, like an abandoned museum exhibit. For a fleeting moment, something dangerously close to regret flickered through him. Not for her death, but for the miscalculation at its end. You were supposed to stay predictable, he muttered. He turned away and walked out. Detective Luis Rodriguez reviewed surveillance footage as the city woke. Rodriguez worked early. Criminals tended to unravel before noon. On his screen, a black SUV rolled through a series of gas stations on the outskirts of Chicago, always paying cash, never lingering. The license plate had been flagged overnight. Track that vehicle, Rodriguez ordered. He's not leaving the state yet. His assistant hesitated. You think he's running? Not yet, Rodriguez said. Men like Asher don't run until every other option collapses. Isabella felt the day tighten around her before it began. Johnson accompanied her from the moment she stepped into the hallway. No words passed between them. None were needed. Everything she touched, the coffee cup, the door handle, her coat zipper, felt faintly unreal, like part of life she had already left. Davis met them at his office. The warrant is being drafted, he said by way of greeting. The exhumation results came in at dawn. Isabella's breath caught. And confirmed, Davis said. Prolonged exposure. Non-therapeutic dosage. Clear intent. Her knees weakened. She sank into the nearest chair, hands pressed flat on her thighs to keep them from shaking. So that's it? She asked. He's arrested? Not yet, Davis replied carefully, which is why today matters. Johnson crossed his arms. Asher skipped voluntary questioning. Davis's mouth tightened. Of course he did. We believe, Johnson continued, that he's planning something reckless. Possibly direct contact. Possibly an escape attempt after securing leverage. Isabella looked up. Leverage? You. Johnson said bluntly. Davis shot him a look, but didn't contradict him. If he can force you to sign a renunciation, Davis explained, he weakens motive, undermines the narrative, buys himself room to negotiate. And if I don't? Isabella asked. Johnson answered quietly. Then he may decide he has nothing left to lose. Silence settled over the room, heavy as a held breath. What do you want me to do? Isabella asked. Davis hesitated. Then, finally, we let him believe he's ahead. The message reached Matthew at noon. It came through an intermediary, one of the few people still willing to answer his calls. Sparse, carefully phrased. She's nervous, willing to talk. One meeting, neutral location. Tonight. Matthew read it twice. A smile crept slowly across his face. The location was an abandoned airstrip outside Springfield, an arrangement that appeared mutual, cautious, balanced. Matthew arrived first, SUV idling at the edge of the cracked concrete. Two men sat in the vehicle with him, both quiet, both paid well enough not to ask questions. Remember, Matthew said without turning, this is a conversation. Nothing else. The men exchanged glances but nodded. He stepped out as another car rolled into view. Isabella emerged slowly, flanked by Johnson. She looked thinner than he remembered. Eyes darker, posture rigid. Fear suited her, he thought, made her manageable. Johnson stopped several feet away. This is far enough, he said. Say what you came to say. Matthew ignored him, fixing his gaze on Isabella. You look tired, he said almost kindly. You don't belong in this fight. Isabella's voice was quiet but steady. You killed her. Matthew smiled. You're very confident for someone with no power. You already lost, she replied. You just haven't accepted it. His smile tightened. You think the law is some moral force? It's a calculation. And right now, you're the variable. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. You sign, he said, holding it up, and I make your problems disappear. Walk away rich. Alive. Isabella stared at the papers, then at him. What happens if I don't? She asked. Matthew shrugged. Accidents happen. People vanish. You think your lawyer can save you from that? Behind him, one of the men shifted impatiently. Isabella inhaled slowly. No, she said. Matthew's eyes hardened. Wrong answer. At that instant, sirens sliced through the quiet. Matthew spun just as headlights flared across the tarmac. Vehicles swarmed in from three directions, cutting off escape routes. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. Matthew Asher, hand where we can see them. Johnson moved instantly, pulling Isabella back. Matthew froze. For one impossible second, he considered running anyway. Then he saw Detective Rodriguez step forward. It's over, Rodriguez said calmly. You made your last mistake. The guards moved to restrain Matthew. One tried to bolt. He didn't get far. Asher was forced to his knees, arms wrenched behind his back, cold metal biting into his wrists. From the ground, he looked up at Isabella, really looked at her, without calculation, without performance. She met his gaze without flinching. This was never about the money, she said. It was about what you thought you were entitled to. Matthew said nothing as he was dragged to his feet. 2 hours later, in an interrogation room that smelled faintly of bleach and regret, Rodriguez laid out the evidence piece by piece. Audio recordings, surveillance video, pharmacy testimony, forensic reports, Eleanor's journal. It was meticulous, unforgiving. Matthew stared at the table, jaw clenched. You slipped up, Rodriguez said evenly. You talked when you shouldn't have. You underestimated people you couldn't see. Matthew laughed once, hollow. She planned this. Yes, Rodriguez agreed. She did. Matthew closed his eyes for the first time. Isabella sat alone later that night, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, staring out at a city she no longer feared. Davis called shortly after midnight. He's being held without bail, he said. Flight risk. Witness intimidation. The DA is pursuing first-degree murder. Isabella exhaled shakily. So it's over? Davis paused. The trial will be long. But he can't hurt anyone anymore. No, Davis said softly, because Eleanor made sure he couldn't. Isabella ended the call and let herself cry. Not from fear this time, but from release. Somewhere, behind concrete walls and locked doors, Matthew Asher finally understood what Eleanor Vance had taken from him. Not the money, the future. The courthouse smelled of old paper, disinfectant, and something faintly metallic, like rain on stone. Isabella noticed it the moment she walked through the doors, as if her body were cataloging the place the way it had learned to do since fear had entered her life. She paused just past the metal detectors, fingers curling instinctively around the strap of her bag. This was not where she had imagined herself a year ago. William Davis walked beside her, his presence steady, quietly shielding her from the stares that followed. News traveled quickly when money and murder intersected. Journalists lingered near the steps outside, pretending to check phones while watching reflections in glass. Inside, clerks moved with practiced indifference, accustomed to lives unraveling on a schedule. "You don't have to look at him until you're ready," Davis said under his breath. Isabella nodded, though she wasn't sure what ready was supposed to feel like. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. No grand wooden arches, no cinematic drama. Just rows of benches, a raised desk for the judge, flags that looked like they hadn't moved in years. Matthew Asher sat at the defense table, his back to her, hands folded too neatly on the surface. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically, though jail had already begun its work, but diminished as if the certainty that once wrapped him had been stripped away. For a moment, Isabella felt something dangerously close to pity. Then she remembered Eleanor, pale in the hospital bed, voice steady even as death pressed in. See it through. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Proceedings began with the dull gravity of routine. Case numbers, charges read aloud, formal acknowledgments. First-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, coercion, attempted witness tampering. Each word landed like a stone dropped into water, the ripples spreading outward. Isabella took the stand just before noon. The oath felt heavier than she expected. Her voice trembled on the first answer, her name, her occupation, but steadied as the questions moved forward. Dates, times, what she had heard in Eleanor's room, the phone call, the threats, the meeting at the airstrip. She spoke carefully, precisely, the way Eleanor had taught her without ever meaning to. And when the prosecutor played the audio recording, the one Matthew had never known was being captured, Isabella did not look away. Matthew's voice filled the courtroom, calm and chilling. I killed her slowly. For 3 months. Watch her fade. A murmur rippled through the benches. The judge called for order. Isabella felt the weight of the moment settle into her chest, pressing but not crushing. This was what Eleanor had set in motion. Not spectacle, not vengeance, but exposure. When she stepped down from the stand, her legs shook badly enough that Davis had to steady her by the elbow. You did well, he whispered. I wasn't brave, she replied. I was just finished being afraid. He smiled faintly. That's usually what courage looks like. Matthew Asher chose not to testify. It was the only remaining control he had. His attorney argued procedural flaws, questioned the validity of the toxicology timeline, attempted, briefly, to suggest Eleanor's illness could have been self-inflicted or accidental. The attempt died quickly under the weight of evidence. Eleanor's journal was devastating. Not emotional, not dramatic, just dates, symptoms, observations, a life being dismantled in increments. On the 4th day of trial, the forensic pathologist testified. The damage to the liver indicates repeated non-therapeutic exposure over a minimum of 12 weeks, she said calmly. This was not an accident. That afternoon, Jennifer Asher took the stand. She looked thinner than Matthew remembered her, hair pulled back severely, eyes hollowed by sleeplessness. She avoided looking at him. Under oath, she told the truth. About the drug purchases, the lies about a dying relative, the pressure Matthew had put on her to stay quiet. the threats when she hesitated. Her testimony sealed his fate more firmly than any confession could have. Matthew stared at the table, jaw rigid, as the last threads of his constructed reality unraveled. The verdict came quickly. Guilty, on all counts. Isabella felt it less as relief than as a quiet settling, like something heavy finally being set down after too long. The sentencing was scheduled for the following day. That night, Isabella walked alone along the river, letting the cold air bite her cheeks, grounding her in the present. The city lights reflected on the water in broken lines, never still, never fully coherent. She thought of Eleanor, not as she had last seen her, frail and dying, but as she must have been at 30, 40, relentless and brilliant, carving space where none existed. Justice had not come cheaply. It never did, but had come. The judge's voice was even, almost gentle, when she read the sentence. Matthew Asher, the court finds you guilty of premeditated murder in the first degree, aggravated kidnapping, and coercion. For these crimes, you are sentenced to 22 years in a maximum security correctional facility without possibility of parole for 17. Matthew flinched just once. Jennifer received 7 years for conspiracy and aiding in criminal conduct. As the guards led him away, Matthew turned. For a brief second, his eyes found Isabella's across the courtroom. There was no hatred in them now, only the hollow shock of someone finally seeing the full cost of their choices. Isabella held his gaze, then looked away first. Some endings did not deserve acknowledgement. Weeks later, in the quiet of Eleanor's house, Isabella stood alone in the master bedroom. The bed was made. Sunlight filtered through tall windows. On the nightstand lay a single-framed photograph Davis had found among Eleanor's personal effects. Eleanor in her early 40s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp, smiling at something just beyond the frame. Isabella picked it up. "You were right," she said softly to the empty room. "He couldn't see people like me, and that's why you won." She placed the frame back carefully. Outside, the garden stirred in the late afternoon breeze. Life moving forward, not erased, not clean, but intact. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Isabella felt something unfamiliar unfold inside her. Not fear, not obligation, possibility. The money arrived quietly. No fanfare, no dramatic transfer, just numbers sliding from one column to another, names changing hands with the cold efficiency of the legal system. Isabella watched it happen on a tablet screen in William Davis's office. The figures so large they refused to register as real. "This is only the first tranche," Davis said, scrolling. "Liquid accounts, market holdings, short-term instruments. The rest, real estate, clinics, long-term assets, will take longer to restructure." Isabella nodded, though her mind lagged several seconds behind his words. She had imagined, vaguely, that inheriting a fortune would feel like something: exhilaration, terror, triumph. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of an ocean with no idea how to swim, watching the tide rush toward her with patient inevitability. "You don't have to decide anything today," Davis continued, misreading her silence as overwhelm. "Or this month, or even this year. Eleanor structured things so you have time." Eleanor. The name still carried more weight than the accounts themselves. "I don't want everything," Isabella said finally. "I don't want most of it." Davis's fingers stilled above the screen. He looked at her carefully. "You don't have to want it," he said. "You just have to be responsible for it. There's a difference." She considered that. Responsibility had always been part of her life. Rent, bills, obligations that kept her choices narrow and her future carefully rationed. This was different. This was responsibility without constraint, a vast and terrifying freedom. "What did she expect me to do?" Isabella asked quietly. Davis leaned back. Eleanor wasn't interested in control from beyond the grave. She despised that kind of legacy. She wanted two things: for her husband to be exposed, and for what she built not to fall into the hands of someone who would hollow it out. "And you think I'm that?" "I think," Davis said gently, "that she saw in you something she believed would not become corrupted by scale. That deserves respect." Isabella looked down at her hands. They still bore faint scars from years of cleaning chemicals, the skin tougher than it looked. "All right," she said. "Then what do we do first?" The first decision was the house. Eleanor's home, the one Matthew had so confidently claimed, sat on a quiet, tree-lined street, its facade elegant without ostentation. Isabella walked through it slowly, alone, the way one enters a space that still belongs to someone else. The rooms were immaculate, too immaculate, as if frozen at the moment Eleanor had left for the hospital and never returned. The office hit hardest. Shelves of books, meticulously annotated. Framed architectural renderings of clinics that now operated thousands of miles away. A desk organized with almost severe precision. No clutter, no sentimentality. Only function. Isabella ran a hand over the smooth wood surface. "I don't know what to do with you," she murmured, feeling foolish speaking aloud in the empty room. She did not move in. Not yet. Instead, she hired caretaking staff, instructed them to maintain the house but alter nothing. It became a place she visited rather than occupied, a space she needed to understand before claiming. The clinics came next. Eleanor had owned 3 private wellness clinics, high-end and profitable, known for discretion and experimental therapies. Isabella did not pretend to understand how they functioned beyond the broadest outlines. So she hired professionals, trustworthy ones, vetted thoroughly, paid well. She sat in meetings she barely comprehended, asked questions she had once been too insecure to form, and listened, truly listened, the way Eleanor had taught her to without ever speaking the lesson aloud. 2 of the clinics she sold, not in a fire sale, not recklessly, but thoughtfully, placing them in the hands of buyers who would keep staff employed and services intact. The money went into conservative investments, nothing flashy, nothing volatile. The 3rd clinic she kept. It was the smallest, the least lucrative on paper, but it had been Eleanor's favorite. Isabella could see it in the margins of the reports, extra notes, more questions, more attention paid. She kept it running as it was. Some inheritances were not meant to be optimized. The donations followed. A large sum went toward a foundation that subsidized medical testing for patients whose symptoms were dismissed too easily. People like Eleanor had been in the early months, told their suffering was vague, stress-related, invisible. When Davis asked if she wanted the foundation named after her, Isabella refused without hesitation. "Her name," she said simply. "It should be hers. Eleanor Vance Medical Trust." The first press release made Isabella nauseous. She avoided interviews, resisted public appearances, turned away from anything that resembled narrative shaping. She was not a symbol. She did not want to be one. But the world insisted anyway. Headlines follow their own logic. Hospital cleaner inherits fortune, brings killer to justice. The phrasing made her skin crawl. She ignored them. The loneliness surprised her. For all its promise, wealth was isolating in ways poverty had never been. When you struggled, people understood your worries, even if they did not solve them. When you succeeded too suddenly, understanding evaporated. Friends from her old life didn't know how to talk to her anymore. Conversations stumbled, circled money even when they tried not to. Some faded away quietly. Others asked, too directly, for help she no longer knew how to refuse graciously. She learned new boundaries. Painful ones. Necessary ones. At night, she sometimes dreamed of Eleanor. Not dying, not sick, but standing in doorways, observing silently, her expression unreadable. Isabella always woke unsure whether she'd been judged or approved of. 6 months after the sentencing, Isabella sat across from Davis again. "You've stabilized everything," he told her. "Better than most." She smiled faintly. "I still feel like I'm pretending." "Everyone does," Davis said. "The competent ones just pretend consistently." She laughed despite herself. "What will you do now?" he asked. Isabella hesitated. "I enrolled in school," she said finally. "School? Psychology," she replied. "Part-time. I want to understand people better. How manipulation works. Why we miss obvious red flags when we're lonely or tired or hopeful." Davis's expression softened. Eleanor would have liked that. "I like to think so." That fall, Isabella returned to the house one final time before winter. The leaves in the garden burned gold and rust beneath a low sky. She walked upstairs to the master bedroom, where Eleanor had slept, worked, and died. The room felt different now, not frozen but settled. She approached the nightstand and placed a small object beside the framed photograph. The simple silver ring she had always worn, dulled by time and disinfectant. "I'm not giving everything back," she said quietly, as if speaking to Eleanor's ghost. "But I'm not becoming you either. I hope that's all right." She waited, half expecting some sign. There was none, but the silence felt permissive. As she left the room, she closed the door gently, without ceremony. She did not need permission anymore. Outside, the world continued on, complicated, imperfect, unfinished. Isabella stepped into it without fear, not because she was protected by wealth, but because she had learned, too late and just in time, how power truly worked. Time softened the sharpest edges first. Not all of them. Some remained, stubborn and unyielding, but the days no longer pressed against Isabella the way they once had. Fear loosened its grip gradually, retreating in increments rather than surrendering outright. It announced itself less often. It let her sleep. Winter came quietly that year, blanketing the city in gray and white. Isabella learned the rhythms of her new life through repetition. Mornings split between classes and administration calls, afternoons devoted to reading and walking, nights kept deliberately simple. She cooked for herself now, real meals. She learned to savor them instead of eating quickly, as if the plate might be taken away. Money did not erase her old habits, so much as expose them. She still checked bank balances compulsively, still flinched at unexpected emails, still preferred public transport to cars driven by others. Control, she was discovering, came from awareness, not abundance. The trial faded into something archival. Matthew Asher appealed, of course. His lawyers filed motions that questioned procedures, challenged wording, implied bias. Nothing held. Each appeal was denied in a few dry paragraphs that read like a methodical erasure of his last remaining illusions. Jennifer Asher did not appeal. Isabella read the notices without emotion. She had reached the outer edge of what she could give to that story. It no longer belonged to her. One afternoon, halfway through her first semester, Isabella sat in a lecture hall, listening to a discussion on coercive control. The professor spoke without drama, outlining how abusers reframed reality for their victims, how small manipulations accumulated until resistance felt irrational. Isabella's pen stalled mid-note. She thought of Matthew's voice on the phone. "You don't belong in this fight." She thought of Eleanor, isolated in her own brilliance, trusting patience over doubt because that was how she had always won. Understanding arrived not as revelation, but as alignment, patterns snapping into place. After class, Isabella stayed behind. "Is it possible," she asked the professor quietly, "for someone to recognize manipulation only after it fails?" The professor smiled gently. "That's usually when it's recognized." News of the Eleanor Vance Medical Trust's first full year circulated quietly in the industry. The foundation helped fund toxicology screenings for patients with unexplained symptoms. Grants went to research programs that focused on long-term, low-dose exposure risks, areas pharmaceutical companies preferred not to highlight. The work did not make headlines. It changed outcomes. Isabella insisted on annual reports written in plain language, nothing that required translation by experts. Eleanor had hated obfuscation. "We don't hide behind terminology," Isabella told the board. "If people need us, they should be able to understand what we do." They listened. That, she realized, was another kind of power. On the anniversary of Eleanor's death, Isabella returned to the house. Snow had settled in the garden like a hell breath. The windows reflected a pale, distant sky. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood polish and stillness. She moved through it slowly, unhurried now. In the office, she opened the bottom drawer of Eleanor's desk, the one Davis had found locked and hadn't touched. The key had been taped behind the frame of a painting, carefully labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. Inside were personal items, old correspondence, A faded photograph from Eleanor's first clinic opening. Notes scribbled on yellow legal pads, less organized, more raw. And at the bottom, an envelope. It was unsealed. Isabella turned it over. Her name was written on it, careful but unembellished. She sat down before opening it. Isabella, if you're reading this, then the situation resolved as I anticipated. I do not believe in fate, but I do believe in preparation. I chose you because you were where you were when it mattered, and because you did not hesitate when hesitation would have been safer. You will doubt this inheritance. That's healthy. Questioning power is the only way it remains capable of good. Do not preserve my life the way it was. I'm finished with it. Use what I left to build something more honest, whether that means continuing or replacing what existed before. And forgive yourself for surviving. Survival is not theft. Evie. Isabella lowered the letter slowly. Tears came then, not sharp or overwhelming, but clean, like rain washing something loose that no longer needed to be carried. She did not keep the letter in the house. She placed it in a slim folder she carried with her instead, something she thought of not as memory but instruction. Life moved forward. Her studies deepened. Boundaries strengthened. The past receded into something usable rather than haunting. People she met now knew her on her own terms. Not as an heiress, not as a witness, not as a symbol, just as someone observant. Careful, awake. Occasionally, when the wind cut sharply across the streets and the city felt too hard again, she remembered Eleanor's final clarity. Not her anger, not her fear, but her refusal to be misread at the end. That, Isabella realized, was the true inheritance. Not the money, not the institutions, but the insistence on being seen clearly, even when it was dangerous. And that was something no one could take from her. Isabella did not think of justice as victory anymore. There was no triumph in what remained, only continuity, the steady, unspectacular work of living honestly after devastation. Eleanor Vance had not won by surviving, or even by defeating her killer, but by refusing to let her truth dissolve into silence. The poison had failed where it mattered most. It had not erased her will, nor the clarity with which she named what was happening to her before the end. In the life Isabella built afterward, measured, deliberate, unafraid, Eleanor endured not as a ghost or a warning, but as proof. Proof that power, when stripped to its final moment, could still choose integrity over fear, and that sometimes the most enduring revenge was simply making sure the truth lived longer than the lie.